The first reading today is from Flying on the Wings of the Bell Curve by Kaye Love. When we live on the wings, we can go way up high, for it is the struggles that teach us to fly. The leading edge is the bleeding edge. Pain prepares us to soar. We pull up, fall down, then pull up some more. There is an executive whose attention is fleeting. It's a little unusual when she runs a meeting. She jumps from project to project whenever she speaks and produces an event about once a week. There's a school teacher who struggles to hear. All of his students think that he's dear. He listens with eyes, so when the conversation has ended, they always feel heard because they've been attended. There was a president who used a wheelchair. He got really creative to keep things fair. To preserve his power and get things done fast, he got behind his desk just so he could pass. There is a counselor whose mood swings this way and that. He gets sullen, then angry. It's just where he's at. He pays close attention and he learned to let go, and his compassion just continues to grow. There's a young man who struggles hard with learning. Getting a job was his long-time yearning. Once he was trained, he outworked average teens and was praised because he doesn't talk and lean. There is an activist whose name came to be, and I have seizures. Just a minute, you'll see. It taught her to speak up, to say what she needs. Eventually, she even learned how to lead. We must be careful what is measured and what is believed, or someone may think reasonable means you will just leave. Yes, normal is a bell curve. Strange as that may sound, it is at both edges that our gifts are found. The second reading is from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 13 to chapter 5, verse 1. But just as we have the same spirit of faith that is in accordance with Scripture, I believed and so I spoke. We also believe and so we speak, because we know that the one who raised the Lord Jesus will raise us also with Jesus, and will bring us with you into his presence. Yes, everything is for your sake, so that grace, as it extends to more and more people, may increase thanksgiving to the glory of God. So we do not lose heart, even though our outer nature is wasting away, our inner nature is being renewed day by day. For this slight momentary affliction is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all measure, because we look not at what can be seen, but at what cannot be seen. For what can be seen is temporary, but what cannot be seen is eternal. For we know that if the earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens.
Hi, I'm glad to be here today. So today we are talking about welcoming all abilities, and I have a short announcement before I get started. With this service, we are now qualified for the bronze level, a disability-friendly, accessibility badge from the United Methodist Church, and our audit form has been filled out. The trustees have signed it, and it's waiting for Chelsea and the district superintendent to sign so that we can start advertising that we are now disability friendly in addition to being open and affirming. So today we are celebrating Access Sunday, and our focus is on welcoming. Both welcoming disability as an opportunity for spiritual growth and transformation, and welcoming as a response to others in a way that leads them to feel welcome, develop a sense of belonging, and support their spiritual growth. The sacred and mystic literature of many traditions mentions the contribution of disability to spiritual growth. In this reading from Corinthians, Paul was writing to a cosmopolitan community in the early church who were trying to figure out how to include people with a variety of backgrounds, beliefs, and gifts. In this passage, he informed us that even though our nature is wasting away, our outer nature is wasting away, our inner nature is being renewed every day by day. And one of my favorite quotes is attributed to the Sufi mystic Rumi, who wrote, "The wound is where the light enters you." St. John of the Cross, the 16th century mystic, Spanish mystic, said, "In the dark night of the soul, the bright flows the river of God." Ram Dass, an American author, psychologist turned spiritual teacher, made the documentary Fierce Grace about his experience, transformation after a stroke, and repeatedly talked about being stroked by grace. My personal experience has also led me to see disability as an opportunity for spiritual transformation. For the 35 years I had seizures, not knowing where my body was going to go at any moment, taught me to accept whatever happens. It's kind of like, oh well. And it freed me to live like there might be no tomorrow. Medication with the side effects of suicidal thinking gave me the opportunity to learn that I am not my thoughts and identify with my higher self instead of my thinking self. Multiple whiplash injuries led me to study mindfulness-based pain management and Tonglen meditation, where I learned that I am also not my pain, and that suffering is not caused by pain, and that my resistance to my pain is what causes suffering, and when I accept it, I can release it. Needing to accept help put me more in touch with the divine love that comes to me from others, and it also taught me that to see that giving others the gift of feeling helpful is indeed a benefit to them. The welcoming prayer shared in this meditation assisted me with learning to let go of my constant fear about the possibility of having a seizure at any moment. By letting go of my need for security and survival, I let go of my focus on outcome and trusted that if Spirit was moving me to go somewhere, that whatever happened was going to be okay, even if it was dramatic news about the dangers of crossing the street with a disability. And I realized that regardless of what happened with my body or my consciousness, that divine action was at work in my life. Disability is also highlighted in the heroes of sacred stories of various cultures. Moses was said to have a speech impediment, and he served as a prophet and spokesperson for God. Buddha was thought to have depression and developed a technology for practicing acceptance of mental fluctuation and remaining at peace. The Hindu sage Vyasa chronicled volumes of sacred epic text and is said to have been born with deformed limbs. Jesus modeled exceptional loving as he obtained total disability at the hands of the Romans and directed forgiveness towards them. The first reading shared today came to me when I was contemplating how to discuss the strength perspective on disability with parents of children who experience grief about the developmental milestones that they were not able to reach. It was inspired by my father, a statistics major, who always taught me normal is a bell curve and everybody is on it when I was spending time wishing to be normal. He also, in a very loving way, often reminded me that I fly on the wings. Disability is part of being human. The disability community is the only marginalized group that anyone can join at any moment, and that everyone will join at some time. 1 in 5 people live with a disability, and 1 in 4 have mental health issues. Yet, even though there is acknowledgement of the gifts and grace that can be found in disability, there is still significant stigma. Research on attitudes towards people with disability has shown that many people would rather die than be limited in mobility, memory, thinking, and would even prefer assisted death to incontinence. If we are identified with our abilities, it can indeed be hard to imagine letting go of who we are. It is easy to get entrapped in our ego's desire for control and identification with the desire for esteem, approval, comfort, convenience, security, and survival. When we allow our ego to guide our response to disability, we end up in judgment of ourselves and cling to our ability instead of identifying with the divine presence that is within ourselves. This leads to a fixation on the experience of loss that leaves us feeling separate from God and stifles the resolution of grief and the realization of grace. This negative response to disability not only creates an obstacle for one's own spiritual development, it also leads to a negative response to others experiencing disability and makes it hard to perceive them as capable of thriving so that we can see them as created in God's image as they are. This negative perspective can lead us to judge another's life as not worth living, leading us to feel separate from them and pity them. It is the opposite of welcoming someone in a way that they can develop a sense of belonging. Judgment from others may be an obstacle to the realization of the self as made in the image of God. Pity, while it arises out of a true sense of compassion and caring, is based on a perception of misfortune and creates a bitter experience for everyone involved. It is an expression of vicarious or secondary trauma in response to a negative perception of someone else's experience. Have you ever thought, oh, this must be horrible. Look at all the sad faces of everyone around me. Have you ever found yourself exhausted at the end of the day because, in addition to the stress you are experiencing due to some unwanted, unpleasant, maybe even traumatic event, you have to deal with people becoming horribly distressed when they see you or hear of your condition? Have you ever experienced a sinking feeling of shame that occurs as a result of others looking at you like your life is not worth living? Have you ever avoided people because you cannot stand any more sad faces? Well, then you know, pity is not pretty. While I may not look like a pretty provoker, I have a long history with the experience of pity. When I was 9, I hit my head and began to have seizures. I would awaken injured, mute, and blind. During this dark period when I was unable to respond, there was always a crowd of people talking about how awful it was, how it should not be happening, how pitiful condition. The first thing I saw was always a look of terror. The same look appeared whenever I talked about seizures. I also remember seeing the sad expressions of others when they saw people with other disabilities. and hearing comments about how pitiful they were. I remember knowing that I too was a pitiful purveyor of sadness to others. At first, I did not connect these reactions of others to my experience of low self-worth. I just thought that in addition to being epileptic, I was mentally unstable. It was all I could do not to join the party and pity myself. However, I was committed to learning not to be miserable. I was determined not to go through life feeling pathetic. I would write affirmations about being okay with how I am and tell myself positive things, yet I still had this feeling that I was less than others. I increased my efforts to feel better throughout my 20s by reading self-help books and getting therapy. The experience of myself as pitiful lessened, yet it lingered. This perspective was an obstacle to seeing myself as sacred. Because I had seen a lot of people who looked like they could use to be happier, I went to school to learn how to be a psychotherapist. One day in class, my professor said, "We learn about ourselves from the facial expressions of others." This statement lingered in my mind as I left, and after class, someone asked me about a huge bruise on my leg. I said, "Oh, I get those all the time. I have seizures. I thrash about. I run into things." This was not a big deal to me. It happened all the time. I was used to it. And then there it was, vicarious trauma, all over their faces. Oh, how awful that must be. How sad you have to endure it. I don't know if I could handle it. As I saw the bitter looks on their faces, I experienced a sinking feeling of shame for causing their discomfort. Then flash back to the lecture. We learn about ourselves from the facial expressions of others. I thought, that's it. It's not about me. This is a reaction of others. At that moment, I realized I am not pitiful. I'm just responding to the negative reactions around me. I became curious about this phenomenon and started looking at other people's faces when they saw or heard about a disability out in public. Some people just look up overhead like they're trying to avoid the knowledge of something unpleasant. Some divert their eyes downward like they're ashamed of the judgment they are making. Some people furrow their brow and stare as if they see a problem to solve. Just as professionals who deal with trauma on a regular basis get compassion fatigue, I propose that people with conditions that other people perceive as unfortunate are subject to a vicarious stress condition I call pity fatigue. Now, when I see the squinched up face that says, "Oh, how bad for you," I remember that they are mired in their own fear and attempting to bond through the bitterness they feel. They are unable to focus on the sweetness of grace that appears when there are challenges and the gifts that result from overcoming obstacles. I now know that that is not about me or my situation. When I see others who are facing something that looks difficult for me, I remember that they have strengths and gifts that I do not know of, and I become curious about who they are and God's action in their lives. I choose to bond with the unseen sweetness which lies beyond what is bitter at first encounter. I look them in the eyes and smile and send them love. And knowing that they are a manifestation of sacred consciousness, perfect just as they are. I encourage you to welcome others by being curious about the light of God within them and the strengths and gifts that they have to share, instead of focusing on your assumptions about their limitations. Know that regardless of what is going on, they are made in the image and likeness of God, and hold faith that grace will come through by any experience of brokenness someone may experience. As Rumi said, the wound is where the light enters. Honor expressions of grief and offer concern without pity. You can make a comment such as, "Wow, that seems like it would be very difficult. How are you doing with it?" Because it may be normal to them. Instead of asking, "That must be awful," ask, "Is there a way I can be supportive?" And if they don't know, you can ask, would you like some suggestions? And if they say no, honor their autonomy and do not force advice or assistance. Use generosity in your assessment of others. Remember that everyone is doing the best they can with what they have. And let go of telling yourself stories about what they could or should do differently. If you feel moved to offer to pray for someone, avoid offering to pray anything away. Let others tell you what they would prefer. There is actually a book about this called My Body Is Not a Prayer Request that discusses the pain of being approached as if one body is not how God intended it to be. Instead, ask them in the same way that you would ask anyone else if you could hold them in prayer for a joy or a concern. They may want you to pray to lift the blight of ableism. If someone tells you they need an accommodation, thank them for sharing. Do not argue about what they need or suggest that it is impossible. I've had many experiences with people telling me that the accommodations I need are neither valid nor feasible. Once I even had a minister tell me that I was rude for asking. Having needs dismissed without consideration is very disheartening. Instead, let them know that we are committed to helping them feel welcome. And even if it is something we need to work towards, assist them to notify staff of their needs. And we now have a link on our newsletter for how to request an accommodation. And I invite you also to look at more suggestions for welcoming. I found this from the Church of Christ, Accessibility to All. We're going to be working on that qualification as well. There's some brochures over there and some more ideas on how to welcome people with disabilities into our community. So as you go forth, center yourself in the knowledge that everything is here for our learning and welcome it as such. Have faith that every change and every challenge is an opening for grace. Welcome all that comes to you and see the light of God in all who you encounter.